Hey, what's up? I'm gonna do a video talking about the idea of power from the perspective of paganism, right? Because a lot of times we forget a lot of the presuppositions that we make are from a Christian viewpoint, right? Like the idea of liberty and freedom, ideas of justice. We we actually get a lot of those ideas from the Bible and from a Christian presupposition, right? But a lot of secular people have made those Christian presuppositions without even realizing it, right? So prior to like when Jesus came and prior to the first, second century, there was a completely different mentality. So like there was the Romans was they got a lot of their ideas from the Greeks, and their whole idea came from that um, the world was basically made up of material and spirit, right? There was like a dualistic nature of the universe, and that um, the material that made up the universe um, was either eternal or it wasn't really real, and it was um, they put there's two schools of thought that it was either eternal and energy is eternal, and that God was just the force behind the creation, and He is the force that pushed the eternal energy into existence. And other people held that matter and material was just a conception to materialize the ideal, that the spirit and the mind was basically what the universe consisted of, right? So the real thing was the concept behind it, the ideal behind the material, right? Okay, so because they held to that presupposition that the universe was basically made up of energy or made up of concepts, they had an original thing that made the energy or invented the concepts, right? And that idea for them was God. They called it Jove, and it was their God. But in order for God to be personalized onto like a conceptual level, right? Because you have that problem that you have an infinite force, you have an infinite concept, but you have a finite mind. So they're like, how do I know things? How do I know that infinite thing? And basically they would say you couldn't, right? You couldn't really know it, but you can know it in part through nature, through what you see, through what you observe, and through yourself, through your own consciousness, right? So they held the dualistic nature of reality, and the to be like how we would understand, in part, the concepts of the infinite force that created the universe, or the infinite concept that was the original concept that invented all the ideal concepts that we would understand, right? So that's why they could justify the ideas of having like gods, right? It's like they knew that their gods weren't the infinite creator God, but they understood that they needed a lesser God in order to understand any concepts of anything, right? So that's why they invented like Zeus and Gaia. Each individual part of creation had their own God because that was a personalization of the infinite God that was Jove. So like Jove manifested in the heavens was Zeus, and Jove manifested in the earth was Gaia. Jove manifested in the ocean was Poseidon. Every area of life had a god, right? So they broke it down into infinite small things. Like they had a god of beer, they had a god of dogs, they had a god of horses. Every aspect of creation had as dualistic spiritual personality in some sort of God creation, right? So the ultimate dualistic creation was okay, and myself, what is the deal with me? And because you had the concept of being part of that dualistic creation, well, you were part of Jove, right? So you yourself were in part of God, right? So that's the idea of pantheism. Pantheism is the idea that everything is God, right? Christianity taught another thing. Christianity believes that God, the creator, is apart from creation. So God and creation is all things. But God is not creation, and creation is not God. There's a separation, right? And we're not dualists. We don't think that like the universe has a soul. We think that there's a God and there's creation. And God created matter out of nothing, right? And we know things because he's the original. So that's like the difference. But the Greeks held that God was unknowable. He was only knowable through the ideal or through the observable, right? And because they were part of it, they became part of God. So they held to the idea of pantheism, that everything is God. And because everything is God and I'm part of everything, I can be God, right? So how this gets into power and the ideas of pagan ideas of power and how they're different from Christian ideas of power, right? So they held the presupposition that God existed. God was unknowable. God was only knowable in part through our consciousness and our observing things, right? So they completely threw out the ideas of morality, what is good and what is evil, right? Because Christians come from a presuppositional viewpoint of there is a moral standard, right? The moral standard is what God relates in Scripture, right? The Platonic, Neoplatonic people, the Greeks and the Romans, didn't have a moral standard. The moral standard was, didn't really exist, right? It was what one could force upon another, right? So their idea of power and their idea of morality is what they could force another person to do. Okay, so like, um, example, like when we think of a Christian authority, we have a concept that one person should be just, right? But we have a biblical definition of what is just, right? We use a standard, we presuppose a moral standard, right? That this is what justice is. Even if you're not a Christian, you have an idea of what justice is. But before Christianity and those presuppositions came into account, the pagans also had an idea of something along the lines of justice, right? But their ideas came from the pre Christian ideas, which were based upon nature, their communion with nature, and their own ideas, right? Like my own self. So they had an idea of power, nature, and magic. Like magic, what we think of is like tricks, like David Blaine and stuff. But they had a different idea of magic because they understood that there was a spiritual essence of the universe, right? Because they were dualists. And they thought that certain individuals could have a greater connection with the spiritual side of creation, right? So for them, the idea of magic was more like what we call science, right? Like they had a unknowable part of nature that they're trying to figure out. And they would try to experiment to say, okay, how do I get in touch with this spiritual essence or this part of nature, right? So there were guys that they felt like when they saw like electricity and things like that, they're like, that's part of like the magical essence of the universe, the dualistic essence of the universe. And they would try to like experiment with that and try to get into contact. And the idea is that for magic and power go together because they were like the person who was in more contact with this with the soul or the spirit of the universe could manipulate nature to his liking. He could utilize nature to make himself more powerful, right? So the ideas of magic and power got all united together, and like that's why kings and that in these times would like try to claim that they were gods, right? Because they're like, I am more powerful than an average person because I'm in more contact with the spiritual essence of the universe, and I can force other people to do things because I have more power, and because I can force other people to do things, I am more godly, right? So their idea of godliness and morality was tied into their ability to force other people to do things and their ability to manipulate nature to their benefit, right? So, like when we think about pagan power, what you got to be thinking about is somebody putting their boot on your face and grinding it into the ground. That's how they felt about power. They had the ability to dominate and control groups of people or individuals. That for them, the pagan idea of power is about control and ability to manipulate nature into your benefit, right? So power, control, and mystical connection with the soul of the universe was what they held to. Those are their presuppositions, right? So along comes Jesus, and he has a whole different idea of what power implies, right? He starts teaching about strength perfected in weakness. He starts teaching about um, that, like, justice. Justice is about the powerful defending the weak. It's not about you, one king or one person dominating another person and stomping their face into the ground and saying, I control you because I can, right? He starts teaching about humility. He thinks that pride is a sin. The Bible presupposes that with great power comes great responsibility, right? It starts teaching about responsibility, morality, what is right, what is wrong, sin. It talks about mercy, grace, redemption. Okay, all of these things we kind of even secular people now teach a version of grace, mercy, redemption, justice, right? But they're trying to do it in a humanistic way. But you have to understand that prior to all these presuppositions, there was an idea. It was about power, magic, and it was about domination, right? And the problem is right now, a lot of people are trying to go back before Christianity because they hate Christianity so much and say, okay, we could reject all those presuppositions and let's put ourselves in this idea of the pantheistic ideas of Plato and Aristotle, that creation is all that there is, that there is a mystical element to that nature, that we are in tune with it, and that we can use that to our benefit. This is like witchcraft. This is the ideas that a lot of the social elite get into. That's why a lot of them worship demons. For example, there's a lot of demon worship in Plato because Plato believed in the spiritual essence of the universe, right? And he understood that there was a fallen nature. Well, he kind of understood that man was not God, right? There was a limited nature. So he started to come up with the idea of if we want to the the contact the spiritual essence of the universe, like in a dualistic sense, like the soul of the universe, then you would need to find some sort of spiritual essence that was also either sinful or limited, right? So the Greeks held that there was like holy spirits and then there was unholy spirits. So that's why they started contacting demons because they didn't view morality as like in the biblical tense. They just viewed things like as a lack of power or there is a different side of the power. And they would worship or try to call upon demons because they felt that in order to contact the spiritual realm, you would need to find some spiritual realm person or some spirit that is existing in the spiritual realm that could also come into contact with a limited sinful person. So they would start like worshiping demons. That's why when you um, start studying a lot about the occult and things like that, a lot of the social elite also try to do the same thing. They try to contact demons, they try to worship Molech and all these kind of things, Baalim, because they basically are holding to the presuppositions of the pagans that are pre-Christ, right? So you have to understand the presuppositions of the pagans and what they're going for to get into that mentality. But it's hard because even a secular person has been so um, we've lived in the Christian presuppositional things for so long that we have concepts that are they're deeply infected with the Christian paradigm, right? But we have to understand that there are people who are rejecting this paradigm completely, and they're going back to the power-based mystical elements of paganism, right? So watch out. Think about it. You gotta study people, study what they've read, study what they're reading, and you can kind of understand where they're going and why they're doing what they're doing. Because there are a lot of people, rich people, smart people, who hate Jesus and have rejected Jesus's teachings and are living under another worldview completely. Paganism, pantheism, and it's self worship. Ultimately, they're worshiping themselves, and they're going for complete control of the ability to manipulate others and groups of others. They want to control, dominate. For them, that's what power is: the ability to dominate and force another person or groups of persons to do their will. That is a pagan idea of power, and they're doing so using mysticism and pure, unadulterated force. Right? It's paganism. Watch out. They're coming for you.